Hi, hopefully people can hear me. Just wait and see how people are doing and who's going to join us today. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, let's have a look. Brilliant, excellent. Yeah, you can hear me, fantastic. Well, welcome to the web class today. Again, GCSE web class on diffusion in living organisms. So we've got a nice live snap revised GCSE biology in diffusion in living organisms. So hopefully we can have quite a few questions and answers today. And I'll take you through it soon, and we'll be looking at the specification points very soon. Just give everybody a chance to join in, and then we'll get going. So hopefully everybody's doing okay and enjoying the summer. So most people are now on summer holidays, I think. Right. Okay, let's just see how we're doing. And then I will get my screen up and running. So while we're just waiting, I will share my screen. And then hopefully everybody can see it. Should be coming up in just a minute. All right, so hopefully, yeah, good. Got my screen up and running now. Brilliant. Hello, hello. All right, so we've got a few people joined us today. Where's everybody from? Just interested to see. Right. So we'll start this web class in just a moment. We'll just wait and just see if anybody else is joining us before we get going. Birmingham, oh, very close to me. I'm near Birmingham. From Manchester, brilliant. All right. So we're doing well here. Birmingham and Manchester. I wonder how's it up there at the moment? You got some sun? Got to get some sun in during the holidays, haven't we? Seems we probably won't be going abroad. Right. Okay, I think we're about ready to start then. So, like I said, welcome to my the GCSE biology web class, talking about diffusion in living organisms. So let's have a look at the specification and the objectives, but let me introduce myself first in case you haven't come across me before. So I am Philippa and I am the lead GCSE biology teacher. And I've got a BSc in animal science from Leeds University. And also at Leeds University, I did a PGC in biology and games. I'm a teacher and I'm still a head of biology with 25 years of experience. And I hope you're going to find out that I've got quite an infectious enthusiasm. I love all things biology, as my family will back me up. So, oh, Pakistan, brilliant. And you've got sun, yeah, more than we have down here. So from Pakistan, lovely. Hi, Jay. So today we're going to look at the objectives, what we're going to be looking at today in the diffusion in living organisms. So we're going to explain the need for exchange surfaces and transport systems in multicellular organisms. We're going to describe how mammals, fish and plants are adapted for exchange because they need to have special adaptations for diffusion to occur properly and efficiently. And we're going to describe the adaptations that make exchange surfaces more efficient. What we're not going to cover today is we're not going to be looking at the circulatory system because that is part of the transport, isn't it? We're not going to be looking at digestion specifically, and we're not going to look at translocation and transpiration today. So we're going to focus on our diffusion and the diffusion surfaces. So first of all, let's have a look at the AQA specification points. So we need to look at diffusion at 4.1.3.1, and this is diffusion. And you need to be looking at the surface area to volume ratio, which is incredibly important when we're talking about diffusion, as I'm sure many of you know. And we will be talking about here explaining the need for exchange surfaces and transport systems, and to explain we'll be talking a little bit about the lungs as well. And you're from New Zealand, fantastic, hello from New Zealand. What time is it in New Zealand at the moment, I wonder? So that's very dedicated to be joining us from New Zealand. So lungs are also repeated under 4.2.2.2. Obviously, hopefully you've all got your specification points off your exam board websites now, because they're really, really important to follow while you are going through your classes, so that you can see what you've covered, what you've got to go, what you've got to do yet. And also it helps when you're coming to revising so that you can tick off the topics. All right. So with that in mind, let's have a look at OCR specification points then. Again, we need to look for the explanation of the need for exchange surfaces, and we need to describe some of the substances that are exchanged. And we're not going to be doing the circulatory system today, as I said. 2.2c, the relevance of the gaseous exchange system. All right, so the circulatory system itself will be covered in a later class. Okay. So let's have a look at Edexcel then. Edexcel, again, you need to look at how the leaf is adapted for gaseous exchange, root hair cells, and how things are transported around the body. So we're going to be looking at the carbon dioxide, etc. today. We're going to be looking at the exchange surfaces and how they are specially adapted. So let's have a look at what you already know. What do we already know? Can anybody give me a definition for what diffusion is? Anybody give me the definition of what diffusion is? Has anybody got any ideas? What do we think diffusion is? You must have come across diffusion by now in biology. Net movement of substances from an area of high to low concentration. Well done. All right, so it's the net. Net is very important because that's the overall, isn't it? So it is the net movement. And you can say of molecules or of particles in a solution or in gases, obviously not in solids. So in a solution or gas, because in solids, the molecules can't move around, can they? So it's got to be in a solution or a gas. From an area of high concentration, you're doing really well here. So we've got Carl, Jay, Nikki, you're all doing well. Or gas. From an area of high concentration to low concentration. And of course, it's down a diffusion gradient, isn't it? Concentration gradient. It's a bit like, I always talk about it with my students at school. If you imagine a hill like this, whoop, bit wobbly, okay, and you've got a car at the top of it, if you let its handbrake off, it's going to go down the hill, isn't it, on its own accord. So it's just going to, it will just roll down the hill because it's going from a high area to a low area. So that's what I always think about with diffusion, a car on a hill and letting off its brake, and it just rolls down the hill, down the concentration gradient. So does anybody know what factors affect the rate of diffusion? What could speed up or slow down the diffusion rate? So can anybody tell me what could speed up the rate of diffusion? Has anybody got any idea? Clue is the car down a hill would be one of them. Temperature, brilliant. Temperature, straight away, Carl. So temperature, high kinetic energy. So the molecules are moving more quickly. And if they move more quickly, then diffusion can occur more quickly. Yes, brilliant. Temperature. Surface area, brilliant. Surface area. pH, not so much. pH is more our enzymes, all right, where it affects the shape of the enzymes. So it's more to do with the temperature, surface area, concentration gradient. Well done. So concentration gradient, in other words, the steepness of the hill for that car. So concentration gradient, surface area, brilliant. And we're going to be looking at that today because a lot of the exchange surfaces have a much greater surface area, don't they? Temperature, because of the increase in kinetic energy. Brilliant. Diffusion distance. Fantastic. You're on fire there, Carl. So, oh, you're from Zambia. Hi. Hi to Zambia. I have been to Zambia. I loved it. So diffusion distance as well. All right. So concentration gradient, surface area, temperature, and diffusion distance are all important when we're talking about diffusion. All right. So let's start looking at our diffusion in mammals and fish, shall we? So let's have a look at this. Diffusion in mammals and fish. Brilliant. And then let's have a look then. What's the problem with size? All right. Yeah, distance, brilliant. So well done. That's Edna, brilliant. Keep on talking to me. It makes the class so much better. So when we look at these organisms, here's some bacteria on a Petri dish, and here's a fly, and there's us. All right. Now, bacteria are obviously single-celled organisms, aren't they? They're unicellular organisms. So bacteria or protozoa or algae, they're very simple organisms, aren't they? And so the single-celled organisms can rely completely on diffusion for exchange, can't they? All right. Because they're so small, they have a much larger surface area to volume ratio. Yeah, smaller organisms, well done, Carl, smaller organisms have a larger surface area to volume ratio, and that's what is important about it. So I always talk about the fact that if you had a lump of jelly, okay, and you were going to dissolve that jelly in hot water, you're not going to leave it in a big lump like this. You're going to cut it down into the individual ones like that, aren't we? Because that's going to increase the surface area so it dissolves more quickly in the hot water, all right? Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So single-celled organisms, unicellular organisms, their passive diffusion meets all the needs of the organism. So it meets all the needs of that organism because it has a large surface area to volume ratio, doesn't it? Okay. So yeah, if you're trying to have set up a Snap Revise account, do email in, won't you? All right. So single-celled organisms can inhabit anywhere. Well, not quite necessarily, because what about temperature might affect them? So some of them might be tolerant to high temperatures like thermal vents, and others would die if it got too hot. So they can't just inhabit anywhere. However, they don't need transport systems. They don't need exchange surfaces. They can get all their needs from the surrounding area. Does that make sense? All right. So now simple multicellular organisms, such as this fly here, all right, so organisms like insects, flatworms, can really rely on diffusion as well. So passive diffusion meets the needs of those organisms. Some of them do have slight specialization. So you've got these little tubes that go through the insect, but it's still relying on diffusion from the air. All right, if hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, that's exactly why the large organisms need specialized gaseous exchange systems, because they have a small surface area to volume ratio. So simple multicellular organisms, again, they can rely on passive diffusion. They may have a few extra helping hands, like the tracheae in insects, which are tubes that carry the air through the insect. But on the whole, the passive diffusion meets the needs. However, when you get to this large organisms here, such as us, we have a small surface area to the volume ratio, and that means that we need assistance. All right. So the maximum size of insects, when we're looking at the insects such as the fly, the maximum size of insects is in part determined by the distance that oxygen can quickly diffuse into their cells. Okay. Diffusion rate decreases as the volume increases. In other words, as the surface area to volume ratio decreases. So if their cells are roughly the same size as ours, they have more surface area oxygen diffusion than us. So to overcome these limitations of this diffusion, okay, for the larger multicellular organisms, they need transport systems and exchange surfaces. All right, and exactly what you say there, Kyle, the lungs in humans and gills in fish. So we're going to be looking at these. So they need specialized transport systems and exchange surfaces. So we're going to have a look at some of these specialized surfaces. All right, so that's what we're going to be moving on to. We'll look at the lungs first, seeing as that we have lungs. Right, so what do we know about the lungs then? How do we get a large surface area? How do we increase the surface area of the lungs? Can anybody tell me how the surface area of the lungs is increased? Some of you might not have done the lungs yet, but if you have, can you tell me? Alveoli, excellent. All right, so we have lots of alveoli. So there's many alveoli. That's the first thing people think about is the alveoli, because lots and lots of alveoli give us a large surface area. And one way that some people like to think about it, the comparison of the lung surface area, is that they're about the size, if you spread out all the alveoli from your lungs, they would cover one side of a tennis court. All right, so that gives you an idea of just how large the surface area is. Yeah, so alveoli, and of course, yes, brilliant. Well done, Kyle. We have bronchioles, don't we? Because we've got to get that air into and out of the lungs in the first place. So we need to get that air down to the alveoli, but to get it there, we need a massive series of tubes which branch off like a tree. All right, so it's like an upside down tree, where the trunk of the tree, so if you imagine this is the trunk of the tree, if it was upside down, can anybody tell me what that's called? The main tube that is going from your mouth down towards your lungs. Can anybody remember Some people find it quite tricky to spell, but it starts off like the trunk of the tree. So can anybody tell me? Yeah, brilliant. The trachea. The trachea. Okay, so that's the main tube that's going from our mouth down into our lungs, all right? And the trachea, as you can see from these stripes across here in the trachea, there's bands of cartilage, and that helps hold open the trachea so it doesn't get squashed by organs around it. So that makes sure that we've always got space for the air to go in and out of the lungs. All right, so that's the trachea. The trachea then branches off. So if we've got the trunk of the tree, now we're going to the main branches of the tree. So what are the branches of the tree? We go from the trachea into, there's two of them. One goes into the left lung and one goes into the right lung. Can anybody tell me what those are? Again, they start with like branches in a tree, branches. So we're going to branch into the bronchi. Brilliant. So we've got a left and right bronchi going to the left and right lung. And then they break down. Now, somebody's already mentioned the next ones, the tiny tubes, which then branch from the bronchi are the bronchioles. And they all end up leading down to the bunches of alveoli. Well done. And somebody's just put on there, brilliant, Kyle, the squamous epithelium, which basically means with the walls of the alveoli. Okay, here's an alveoli. These are the cells making up the wall. All right, those cells are squashed. All right, so they're flattened cells. Instead of being round cells, like cells in the liver, they're quite squashed. And that reduces the diffusion distance that the oxygen and carbon dioxide have to diffuse through to get in and out of the blood. So this is known, if you want to, I'll just put it in there. You don't have to know this necessarily, but squamous epithelium, which is basically flat, it means flattened cells, all right, which are making up the wall of the alveoli. So that's really good. So that gives us the short diffusion distance, doesn't it? So now we've got a short diffusion distance and we've got a large surface area to the volume ratio now, haven't we? Which is fantastic. And then around the alveoli, we have a really, really good, what's here? What am I pointing to in this arrow here? What's that pointing to? Can anybody see what that's pointing to? The red on top of the alveoli there. So what have we got that surrounds all the alveoli? Lots of capillaries, excellent. So a good capillary network, because what that does is as soon as the oxygen passes from the alveoli into the blood, the oxygen is carried away. And so it's maintaining a steep diffusion gradient. Brilliant. Well done, Hannah, as well. Okay, sorry, Nikki, capillaries. Okay, so capillary network, and this maintains a steep diffusion gradient. Brilliant. Now, so therefore maintains rapid diffusion of the oxygen from the lungs into the blood and the carbon dioxide from the blood into the lungs. Now, talking about those flattened cells of the alveoli, when people smoke, tar is deposited in the lungs, and that thickens up the distance that the oxygen and carbon dioxide have to pass through. And so that slows down the rate of diffusion, all right? And also the smoke can irritate the inside of the lungs and the dust particles, and our immune system fights that, which actually starts to break down these alveolar walls, and people can end up with what's known as emphysema, all right? And that then decreases the surface area of the alveoli and therefore again reduces the diffusion rate. So those are two things already. There are many other things that are problematic about smoking, but those are two things which already are causing problems from smoking. All right. So those are the lungs then. So let's have a look at the alveoli in a little bit more detail, shall we? All right. So looking at the alveoli, all right, so we've got really good movement of oxygen in and out of the alveoli due to our trachea, bronchium, bronchioles, and the movement of the diaphragm and the ribs to get the air in and out of the lungs. So it's what we say, we call it well ventilated. And so therefore that means that there's going to be, that maintains those concentration gradients, doesn't it? So here we go. Here's the oxygen going in. We want oxygen in and we want to get rid of the carbon dioxide, don't we? All right. So what happens is the carbon dioxide moves from the blood into the alveoli and then that's breathed out. And the oxygen moves, it diffuses from the alveoli into the blood. So this is how diffusion is occurring. We've got the oxygen diffusing into the blood and we've got the carbon dioxide diffusing from the blood. So as we mentioned before, we've got an efficient blood supply. Now, this good ventilation and this efficient blood supply means that we are maintaining a steep concentration gradient. So we've got a steep concentration gradient, which is what we wanted, don't we, to maintain rapid diffusion rate, all right? And so these many alveoli are giving us a very large surface area. And does anybody know what lines the alveoli? What's that blue layer on the inside of the alveoli representing? Does anybody know what is being represented by that blue layer on the inside of the alveoli? While we're waiting for some answers, I'm just going to put in about the flattened cells. They're epithelial cells or squamous epithelial cells. Flattened cells, epithelial cells, and the wall is only one cell thick. So this blue layer lining the alveoli is a moist surface. Okay, so it has a moist surface on the inside of the alveoli. So it's a water layer or a moist layer. And that means gases can dissolve in it, dissolve in this moisture, helping them to pass across the surface of the alveoli, all right? And also there's something else that you don't necessarily need to know about, but it's interesting. This is surfactant. Some of you might have heard of surfactant, all right? So surfactant, which actually helps keep the alveoli from collapsing, because if you put a piece of paper on a wet table, that paper sticks to the table, doesn't it? So if those alveoli, the gas goes out of those alveoli too much, the water is attracted to each other and it could actually stick the walls of the alveoli together. So surfactant is almost a little bit like washing up liquid and it will stop them from sticking together, all right? It reduces the surface tension of the water, which we might have talked about in chemistry, all right? So we've talked about it's well ventilated to maintain a steep concentration gradient, that the efficient blood supply is maintaining a steep diffusion gradient, that the flattened cells are giving us a short diffusion distance, all right? The red blood cells, what's special about the shape of the red blood cells? Can anybody tell me? If I snapped you can't snap it, but if I cut a red blood cell in half and looked at it, it looks like this. Hopefully you all recognize this. It's biconcave. The shape is biconcave. Does anybody know why it's biconcave? Yeah, biconcave disc. So biconcave means it dips in on both sides. All right, brilliant. So biconcave, more room. The more room for oxygen, Nikki, is the fact that they don't have a nucleus. And they don't have all the other organelles of a cell. When they've actually matured, red blood cells don't have a nucleus, so there's more space for hemoglobin, which is the thing that carries the oxygen. But when we're looking at the biconcave shape of the red blood cells, it's all about diffusion. What it does is it increases the surface area to volume ratio. Okay, so yeah, so the more room for hemoglobin is the lack of organelles inside the cell, inside the mature cell. So that there's more hemoglobin can be packed in to carry the oxygen. So that's really important for red blood cells. But this biconcave shape is to increase the surface area. Brilliant for that. So that's CARM. So brilliant. That's a maximum surface area for the diffusion of the oxygen. Well done. Excellent. Well done for talking to me, because it does make life a lot easier. Right, so that's the alveoli. So now let's have a look. Do you recognize what this is? Does anybody know what this is? Got any idea? It's found in the small intestine. Now, obviously, the small intestine is for, we need to absorb nutrients, don't we? The digested nutrients. And this structure that is drawn in here helps with the absorption of those digested foods. So yes, brilliant. It's a cross-section of the small intestine, and that particular structure, the finger-like structure which is shown there, is a villus. Well done. So this is a single villus, but we obviously got millions of them along the small intestine, so they're villi. Okay. So villi, brilliant. And on top of the villi, can you see that it's all bumpy all the way around? There's microvilli, which basically means even tinier types of villi. So more finger-like projections, but microscopic. So villi and microvilli. It's the villi that are damaged in celiac disease. If somebody eats gluten, it damages the villi, and so we decrease the surface area. All right, so villi and microvilli are very important to increase the surface area. So they are finger-like projections which increase the surface area to increase the rate of diffusion of our small soluble food molecules diffusing from the small intestine into the blood. All right, so things like glucose, when you've just eaten carbohydrates, okay, complex carbohydrates, they're going to get broken down to monosaccharides, single sugars. And glucose could end up in very high concentration in the lumen, which is the center part of the small intestine, particularly after eating, obviously. So it needs to diffuse from the lumen of the small intestine into the blood as rapidly as possible so that we can use it for respiration, etc., and to build up more carbohydrates. And so these finger-like projections increase the surface area to increase the rate of diffusion. Can anybody else see what is this other arrow pointing to over this side? And how is that going to increase the rate of diffusion? Because the whole purpose of these villi is to increase the surface area. So what are these red and blue tubes inside the villi? Can anybody tell me? Veins, good. So this is a vein, and on the other side is an arteriole. All right. So this is showing that there's a good blood supply. So can anybody tell me again what a good blood supply means? What does that do to help increase the rate of diffusion? Efficient blood supply, what does that maintain? What is it that's, yeah, we've got thin cells. Good, well done. The thin cell. So again, it's only one cell thick for the wall of the villus, isn't it? Maintains a steep diffusion gradient. Good. So maintains a steep diffusion gradient, which is so important. It's like that steep hill for getting a car down very quickly. So steep diffusion gradient. So for example, we need that because glucose is used by respiring tissues, isn't it? So it's needed all the time. So we need to be absorbing this glucose from the small intestine. Excellent, well done. So now let's have a look at the gills. in a fish. So a very similar idea to the alveoli, all right? So the gills are made up of lots of little feathery filaments. What do those do? Yeah. So many gill filaments. Okay. So what's that going to do? What's that going to do with the lots of gill filaments? They're like feather-like gills. Yeah, so we've got more oxygen because oxygen is quite low in water, and so the concentration is quite low, so they need to increase the surface area to increase the rate of diffusion of oxygen. And what happens if you look at fish, they open their mouth and then they shut it, and what that does is it squirts the water through a flap called the operculum, and it pushes the water across the gills, and so therefore maintains this continual flow, so it's well ventilated. So continual flow of water equals well ventilated. Okay. And of course, again, we've got a really good blood supply, and that's why gills are very red. So they have many filaments which have many lamellae, good, which are little tiny branches, divide a large surface area. Excellent. Well done, Carl. Well done, Karen. Okay. These are really good answers. So capillary, good capillary network again, equals rich blood supply, which again, of course, maintains a steep diffusion gradient. Excellent, well done. So how does everybody feel about this so far? Do we want to have a go at some exam questions? Do you think you're ready for the exam questions now? Everybody happy? Yeah, for fast diffusion, well done. So 1, 2, or 3, straightforward, all right, super confused. What are we going to say? 1, 2, or 3, you all right? Yeah, brilliant, Carl, you're happy with that? So we'll move on to some exam questions. Yeah, happy, good. Nice work, you're enjoying it, good. So let's have a look at this one then. During breathing, oxygen moves into the blood. Explain how oxygen moves into the blood. Brilliant, you all seem very happy with this topic, that's good. So let's see whether we can get 2 marks for answering this question. So during breathing, oxygen moves into the blood. We know that, all right, because it's diffusing, isn't it, from the alveoli. So explain how oxygen moves into the blood. What are we going to put for the marks? What do we need to say for the marks? So how is the oxygen moving? By diffusion, excellent. And that's 1 mark. From a high concentration of oxygen in the air, because it's about 16% in the air, into the blood where oxygen concentration is lower. Ah, the hemoglobin. Yeah, if you've got a red blood cell like this, it's absolutely packed with hemoglobin, isn't it? And what happens is the oxygen diffuses from the alveoli into the capillaries and into the red blood cells, where the hemoglobin binds to the oxygen so it can carry it all the way around the body. Excellent, well done. So yeah, great stuff. Oxygenated blood from the lungs, good, well done everybody. Right, so let's have a look at this. Now, I mentioned about emphysema earlier, didn't I, with smoking. So emphysema is a disease affecting the lungs. Yeah, you know a lot about hemoglobin. That's really good. Well done for the high affinity of oxygen. Good. We'll be covering that in another class, okay? So emphysema is a disease affecting the lungs. People with emphysema are often short of breath and find exercise difficult. Figure 5 shows an alveolus from a person without emphysema and an alveolus from a person with emphysema. So here on the left, we've got normal alveolus, and then here on the right, we have one from somebody who's got emphysema. So we're looking for 1 mark in this first question. Describe one difference between the alveolus from a person without emphysema and the alveolus from a person with emphysema. So they are asking you to describe. So what do you see? What do you see as a difference between the alveolus from a healthy person and the other one? Low surface area in emphysema. Good. So the person with emphysema, the alveolus has a smaller surface area, or you could say it the other way round, of course. You could say the healthy person has an alveolus with a larger surface area, but that gives you 1 mark. Brilliant. So now let's have a look at the next part. Now we need to explain how the difference you described in part B, part 1, causes the person with emphysema to find exercise difficult. So we've got 3 marks. We've got to think of 3 points here. So because it's got a low surface area, or a lower surface area, what does that mean about the oxygen? So yes, you get faster diffusion in the normal lungs. So if you've got less flow of oxygen, so you've got less diffusion of oxygen, so less oxygen diffuses into the blood. And oxygen, of course, is required for respiration, isn't it? So for respiration, and with exercise, where is that respiration mainly occurring? Where is the extra energy needed when you're exercising? Where do we need all that extra oxygen? Yeah, mitochondria in the cells. Excellent. So mitochondria are the organelles where respiration occurs. For respiration in the muscles, so we've got the mitochondria in the muscles. All right, so there's 1 mark, there's another one. And therefore, if there's less respiration, there is therefore less energy released. For exercise or for muscle contraction. Okay, brilliant. Well done. Super work. So we've got 1 more on this section, and we're going to look at the gills. All right, so let's have a look at the gills, because I'm aware of the time needing to move on to plants. So let's have a look at the gills. Can you see what I mean about the gills looking feathery? All right, so figure 6 shows a fish head and gill. Fish absorb oxygen from the water. Oxygen is absorbed through the gills of the fish. Explain 1 way in which the gills are adapted for rapid absorption of oxygen. So we want 2 marks. So what are these and what's special about this? Large surface area, brilliant, Karim. So large surface area due to lamellae, multifold to make it efficient. So you've got many gill filaments or lamellae. 1 mark. Provide a large surface area. Excellent. Well done. We are all over it. Okay. That's super work. Well done, everybody. So now let's have a look at diffusion in plants, shall we? So we're going to be looking at plant roots and leaves because we need to talk about both of them. So let's have a look at this very well known, I hope, diagram. of a leaf. This is, you find this sort of diagram in all your textbooks, and it's very popular in exams as well. So let's see whether we can label any of this. So I'll put numbers in the boxes. You write down a number and what you think that part of the leaf is. Okay, so let's have a look at this and see whether you can give me any of the parts of the leaf, shall we? So I've put the numbers up there. Who can give me some parts of the leaf? What have we got here? Okay, how are we doing? Anybody got any? Brilliant. Okay, 2. So 2, brilliant. The spongy mesophyll layer, the area which has got lots of air spaces for diffusion of gases. Brilliant stuff. So we've got 1 is the palisade mesophyll. Good. So that's where most of the photosynthesis takes place, isn't it? Right, what else have we got? Palisade, spongy. 3 is stomata. Yeah. Stoma is singular, stomata plural. So what have we got here? Number 5, yes. Okay, brilliant. The vascular bundle in the middle. So the whole thing here is the vascular bundle, and it's made up of our xylem and phloem. Good. 6 is the lower epidermis. And have we got a 4? It's very difficult to tell the xylem and phloem. You would need to see it in greater detail. Xylem has a thicker wall and is more angular. All right, so good question. All right, so xylem kind of looks like this. Okay, when you look at it, because it's got a thicker wall, whereas phloem is more a bit like that. All right. So the top one, yeah, upper epidermis. And that's because the xylem has got a thickened wall to make it waterproof so that it can carry the water like a plastic straw. All right. So let's have a look at the stomata then. All right, so the stomata. Diffusion is needed in plants for what? There's 2 things that diffusion is needed for. No problem, Karen. Okay. We need, what is the plant? What's different about green plants and us? They are autotrophs and we are heterotrophs, aren't they? Brilliant. Well done, Karen. Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. So they need carbon dioxide in and oxygen out for photosynthesis. So when it's photosynthesizing rapidly, it needs lots of carbon dioxide to give the carbon for the glucose, doesn't it? And translocation. Now, translocation is the movement of food around a plant, isn't it, through the phloem? You're close. You're really close with that. Transpiration. Excellent. Transpiration. So we need the evaporation of the water, and that draws up more minerals from the soil via water, and also helps keep the plant cool, like us sweating. So water vapor out. All right, brilliant. Well done. You are doing well. All right. And yes, obviously plants, all of their cells are actively respiring, cellular respiration, aren't they? So they need oxygen for cellular respiration, and carbon dioxide is released from that. And then the carbon dioxide can be used in the photosynthesis when there's sunlight. All right. So the size of these stomata are controlled by what? There's a special cell. Anybody remember what the special cell is that is found on either side of the hole? This is the stomata in the middle, or stoma, because it's just one. One is stoma, many are stomata. Brilliant. Guard cells, because they're guarding the entrance, aren't they? So guard cells. And if the plant is starting to lose water, too much water, then these guard cells will shut the stomata to limit water loss. And you get more stomata on the bottom surface of the leaf than the top surface of the leaf, because the top surface of the leaf is the bit that's facing the sun, where all the palisade cells are, and otherwise too much water would evaporate. So more of them are found on the bottom surface of the leaf. All right. So if that's normal in most plants, not all of them, but most plants. Water lilies, they're in the top of the leaf because otherwise they're just straight into the water, aren't they? Okay. So those guard cells can open and close those stomata to either let more gases in or to stop water from coming out. They will close. So water loss and gas diffusion can be affected by the humidity around the plant, because the more humid the air around the plant, the less water is going to leave or evaporate from the leaves. Can anybody tell me why that is the case? Can anybody tell me why, if a plant is in humid conditions, less transpiration occurs? I wonder whether anybody can tell me that. It's all to do with the topic that we're talking about in this lesson here. Can anybody explain why less water will be lost if it's humid? Well, the guard cells will close to prevent water loss, but in humid conditions, the guard cells can stay open for longer. What do I mean by when the air is humid? What do we mean by when the air is humid? Does anybody know? There's lots of something in the air. Can anybody tell? Yeah, because the air can't absorb more water, because humid means there's lots of water in the air, isn't there? Brilliant, very moist. And so if water is evaporating, it's then water vapor. If water vapor is trying to evaporate through the stomata, it goes by diffusion. And diffusion will only occur rapidly if there is a steep diffusion gradient. But if the water vapor concentration inside the leaf is pretty much the same as outside, diffusion can't occur. And that's why humid conditions reduce water loss. Does that make sense? And that's why when you are in humid conditions, your sweat doesn't evaporate off you properly and you can't cool yourself down properly. All right. So root hair cells, I always like to think of these a bit like Mr. Nosy, if any of you watch Mr. Nosy. And I draw my root hair cell, you can do it like this, and then it's got the nucleus at the top, and then it looks like Mr. Nosy. That's how I always remember it. So what's so important about a root hair cell? What do plant root cells take up? Does anybody know? Does anybody know what the purpose of the root hair is? What does it take up? Minerals, excellent. Mineral ions are absorbed via active transport, which is something we're doing in another lesson, because they're going against a concentration gradient. And then what else are they taking up? Mineral ions, calcium, yeah. Nitrates from the soil for making proteins, and something else which is needed for the transpiration stream. Magnesium, good for chlorophyll, okay. So what is going to carry those water? I just said it, water, well done. You said it just as I said it. Water by osmosis. So osmosis is a special type of diffusion, isn't it? It's the diffusion of water molecules from a high concentration to a low concentration across a selectively permeable membrane. So osmosis is a special type of diffusion. It's diffusion of water molecules from where they're in a high concentration to where they're in a low concentration against over a selectively permeable membrane. And active transport requires energy. Active transport is transporting substances from where they're in a lower concentration, such as mineral ions in the soil, into somewhere like a root hair cell. So that requires energy. Osmosis and diffusion are passive. So osmosis is still passive because it's moving down a concentration gradient. All right, so let's have a look, because we are we all happy with the root hair cell? Do you want me to talk any more about the root hair cell? Are you all happy with that? So why does it have this big projection out the front, by the way? Why does it have this big projection out the front? What's that doing? because obviously we want a good rate of osmosis, don't we? Yeah, it's all good. So this increases the surface area to volume ratio, doesn't it? Yeah, large surface area in the soil, so it helps anchor the plant, but also large surface area for osmosis of water, and the water also carries the minerals through the plant, doesn't it? Brilliant stuff. So let's have a look at one final exam question, shall we, on plants. So look at the diagram showing stomata. So we've got lots of stomata and guard cells here. Water is lost through the stomata. Plants can close stomata to reduce water loss. Explain 2 other ways that leaves are adapted to reduce the loss of water through stomata. Think about the numbers of these. What would reduce the water loss through stomata? And think also what I was talking about with the surfaces. What can we have? Looking at waxy cuticle. Waxy cuticle reduces the water loss. Okay, so we have a waxy cuticle across the top, doesn't it? So the waxy cuticle reduces water loss. What else? What have we got? Waxy cuticle and less stomata. So less stomata reduce surface area. Well, Mark, you've also got the waxy cuticle. It's not waterproof, but it reduces water loss. And also we've got stomata, good, more stomata on the bottom surface. So they are more protected from direct sunlight, because otherwise that's going to increase the temperature, which increases the kinetic energy of the water molecules, which means they increase the diffusion. Because that light is going to heat the molecules up, aren't they? It's going to give them more kinetic energy, so they will move more rapidly, and there'll be a greater rate of diffusion. Fantastic. Well done, everybody, and great exchange of information. So at the end of that lesson, then, you should be able to now explain the need for exchange surfaces and transport systems in multicellular organisms. Describe how mammals, fish and plants are adapted for exchange. So you've got your stomata and your large surface area of the leaf for plants, and then you've got your gills for your fish and your alveoli in the lungs with the mammals. Those are the exchange surfaces. Obviously, there's transport systems as well. Describe the adaptations that make exchange surfaces more efficient. So we're looking at a larger surface area. We're looking for maintaining a steep diffusion gradient, aren't we? All right. So those are really important. Large surface area, steep diffusion gradient, moist layer as well for the, so that the gases can dissolve into them. All right. So, do you have any questions for me? Or are we all happy? Just a reminder for you, there are some more upcoming web classes on YouTube. Don't forget to have a look at these. Set a reminder on your YouTube, and then you can actually, it will warn you or tell you when they're coming up, so that you can carry on with doing further web classes. We've got chemistry, maths, and physics coming up. And the next biology one is going to be on DNA, the genome, and inheritance. Quite a tricky subject for some people. All right. So have we got any questions? Are you all happy? All right. So and if you go on to the Stat Revise website, then you will actually be able to see web classes that are coming up. All right. My pleasure, and have a good rest of day, rest of weekend, and I will see you hopefully again in August. All right, take care, everybody, and I will see you again soon, I hope. All right then, bye-bye.